A small-town auto repair shop becomes the stage for a moment of raw prejudice when a humble mechanic helps a struggling old woman with her bike. What begins as a simple act of kindness spirals into a scene of arrogance, humiliation, and an ominous foreshadowing of something far greater. "Put that down. She's not paying for your charity work on my property." The shout cut through the metallic clang of the workshop like a whip. Every wrench hand, every apprentice, every customer sipping stale coffee turned their heads toward the center bay. The smell of grease and hot metal hung thick in the air. Sunlight streamed through the dusty garage windows, catching in swirls of airborne grit. Outside, Main Street moved lazily, a few trucks passing, a couple of teens skateboarding past the gas pumps. Inside, tension snapped taut. Stanley Rourke, the boss, stood with his hands on his hips, chest puffed like a man who just won a fight nobody else saw. His expensive leather boots tapped against the oil-stained concrete as he leaned forward, towering over his employee. Darnell Hayes didn't flinch. The tall, lean black mechanic was crouched beside a battered old bicycle, hands smeared with chain grease. The bike's frame was rusted, tires sagging from neglect, and perched on the cracked seat was a folded cardigan that had seen better decades. The bike belonged to Mrs. Lillian Foster, white hair in a bun, weathered hands clutching her purse, and eyes full of quiet gratitude. Darnell's voice was calm, steady. "It's just a chain, Stan. Took me 3 minutes to set right." Stan's smirk deepened, voice dripping with condescension. "And 3 minutes of my shop's time, my tools, and my floor space. She's not a paying customer. We don't run a charity here. Not for strangers, and sure as hell not for—" He stopped just short of saying it, but the pause was loud enough. Mrs. Foster shifted uneasily, glancing between them. Her fingers fiddled with the corner of her cardigan. I didn't mean to cause trouble. My grandson's been busy. I just thought—" Stan waved her off like she was a mosquito. "Lady, you can walk that thing to the scrapyard for all I care." A hush fell. Even the old ceiling fan above seemed to slow. Darnell straightened to his full height, the faint clink of the bike chain settling into place breaking the silence. He wiped his hands on a rag, tossed it onto the workbench, and took one step toward Stan. "You know what the thing about chains is?" he said quietly. Stan frowned. "They break easy, but they mend easy too. All it takes is the right hands." Darnell wheeled the bike toward Mrs. Foster, ignoring Stan's glare. Her eyes glistened as she whispered a thank you. From the corner of the shop, someone coughed, awkward, hesitant. The apprentices pretended to busy themselves, but their eyes followed every move. Outside, the sound of a police siren wailed faintly in the distance. Growing louder, Darnell glanced toward the open bay door, a faint, almost knowing smile touching his lips. "Funny thing about broken things," he added, voice just loud enough for Stan to hear. "Sometimes they come back fixed in ways you never saw coming." He handed the bike to Mrs. Foster. The siren cut abruptly, and then the unmistakable rumble of multiple engines rolling slow up the street. The late afternoon sun dipped low, casting long amber shadows across Main Street. Heat shimmered above the asphalt, making the edges of buildings waver like they were unsure of their own shapes. The garage's large bay doors stood open, letting in the scent of dust, motor oil, and faint exhaust. Darnell walked Mrs. Foster out toward the sidewalk, his tall frame blocking some of the glare from her squinting eyes. She held the handlebars of her old bike like it was a lifeline. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured, almost embarrassed. "I know he's your boss." Darnell offered her a small smile. "I fix things, Mrs. Foster. Bikes, engines, radios. Doesn't matter who owns them." Behind them, Stan stood just inside the shadow of the garage, arms folded, jaw tight. The apprentices avoided looking his way. He'd been embarrassed and in front of customers. That wasn't something Stanley Rourke forgot. It was then that the low, rhythmic growl of engines carried over the street. Not one engine, many. Deep, deliberate, mechanical heartbeats that grew louder by the second. Mrs. Foster's brow furrowed. That doesn't sound like farm trucks. Darnell turned his head slightly, scanning the far end of Maine. The shimmer of heat made it hard to tell, but movement emerged, black shapes rolling into focus. 4. No 6, then 7 vehicles. All SUVs. All the same deep glossy black. Windows tinted so dark they were mirrors. They weren't speeding. They weren't in a hurry. They moved in perfect formation, side by side in pairs, like a convoy that had no need to announce its purpose, because its purpose announced itself. Main Street, normally buzzing with small-town calm, seemed to instinctively quiet. Conversations outside the diner stopped mid-sentence. A man with a paper cup of coffee froze, cup halfway to his lips. 2 kids on bikes veered to the side of the road, eyes wide. Stan stepped out onto the pavement, squinting into the sunlight. What in the hell? The SUVs slowed, their engines humming with a strange, smooth precision, too clean to be rural work vehicles. Tires whispered against the asphalt as they came to a halt directly in front of the shop. The lids UVs. Front grille gleamed like polished obsidian. Nobody inside moved. Mrs. Foster shifted closer to Darnell, her voice just above a whisper. They're not from around here. Darnell didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the mirrored glass, his reflection distorted on the curved surface of the lead vehicle's window. Then, with the faintest click, the driver's side door opened. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black suit that somehow looked heavier than the heat would allow. His shoes shone like whetstone. He wore dark sunglasses, his face unreadable. Stan's voice carried a forced bravado. Can I help you folks? The man in the suit didn't answer. Instead, he glanced back toward the other SUVs. 3 more doors opened, each revealing similarly dressed figures, men and women, all in tailored black, moving with the precise calm of people who never had to rush. A ripple of murmurs moved through the small knot of onlookers that had begun to form down the street. Someone whispered the word government. Another muttered feds. Darnell felt the old familiar knot in his stomach. Not fear, exactly. Something else. A knowledge that whatever this was, it wasn't random. The man in the lead suit finally spoke, his voice steady but carrying the kind of weight that made people listen whether they wanted to or not. We're looking for a man named Darnell Hayes. Stan glanced sideways, surprise flickering across his face before it was swallowed by suspicion. What's this about? The man ignored him completely, scanning the small crowd until his gaze landed on Darnell. You'll want to come with us, Mr. Hayes. Mrs. Foster's grip on the bike's handlebars tightened. Is he in trouble? The man in black's expression didn't change. No, ma'am. Quite the opposite. The engines of the SUVs idled softly, like patient beasts waiting for a command. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the hour, sharp and hollow against the tension pressing in from all sides. Darnell stepped forward slowly, his boots crunching against the gravel edge of the road. He stopped a few feet from the suited man, close enough to catch a faint scent of cologne, crisp, expensive, deliberate. Who sent you? Darnell asked quietly. The man allowed the smallest flicker of a smile. You'll find out soon enough. And in that moment, Stan, standing behind them, felt something he couldn't name. A cold, creeping realization that maybe, just maybe, he'd been standing on the wrong side of the chain all along. The following day, the sun rose over Millstone with a certain heaviness in the air. The garage's bright red sign caught the morning light, but inside, the usual hum of engines and clinking of tools felt muted. Earl, The boss stood near the front desk with a coffee mug in one hand, scanning the local newspaper. On the cover, there was no mention of yesterday's firing, but that didn't stop customers from whispering as they walked in. "Did you hear? Jimmy got canned for fixing a bike." Not just any bike, Mrs. Coleman's bike. Wait, the Mrs. Coleman? The rumors spread like spilled oil on concrete, quick and staining. Down the road, in his small but tidy home, Jimmy sat on his porch with a screwdriver in one hand, repairing a squeaky screen door. His wife, Sarah, brought him a cup of tea. She didn't say anything at first, just placed the cup beside him, her eyes carrying the unspoken question, "What now?" Jimmy gave a small smile. "One thing at a time, love. First, this door." Meanwhile, across town, Mrs. Coleman sat at her kitchen table, dialing numbers on her old rotary phone. Her voice carried warmth but also an edge of determination. "Hello, dear," she said to the person on the other end. "Yes, I had a situation yesterday. Young man named Jimmy Good's soul helped me out. And then his boss, Earl, fired him. For it. No, I'm not asking for anything. I just thought you might like to know." The person on the other end chuckled knowingly. "Oh, I think more than a few people would like to know." By noon, the diner on Main Street was buzzing louder than the espresso machine. Patrons leaned over their plates, speaking in low voices, glancing toward the garage across the street. Earl noticed the stares through the glass door. He tried to shake it off, telling himself, "It's just small-town gossip, it'll pass." But something in the air told him it wouldn't. Back at Jimmy's house, Sarah returned from the grocery store, carrying more than just food. She brought a folded note, handed to her by the cashier with a quiet, "Give this to your husband." Jimmy unfolded it. The handwriting was sharp and deliberate. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness sets the biggest wheels in motion. There was no signature. Jimmy stared at the note, feeling the weight of the words. He didn't yet know that the wheels had already begun turning, faster than anyone in Millstone could have imagined. Jimmy had just finished tightening the last screw on the porch railing when he heard the knock. It wasn't the hurried, polite kind of knock you get from a neighbor. It was steady, deliberate, and carried an authority that made him set his screwdriver down before he even opened the door. Sarah peeked from the kitchen. "Expecting anyone?" He shook his head, wiping his hands on a rag. When he swung open the door, two men stood there, dressed in plain black suits, not shiny, not flashy, but the kind that fit like they'd been tailored for serious business. The taller one spoke first. "Mr. James Carter?" Jimmy's brow furrowed. "That's me. We'd like to have a word. May we come in?" Sarah gave Jimmy a hesitant glance. He nodded and stepped aside. The men walked in, scanning the living room as if they'd been trained to note every detail in seconds. "Nice home," the shorter one said. Though his voice didn't carry much warmth, it was more an observation than a compliment. Jimmy motioned to the couch. "Take a seat. Can I ask what this is about?" The taller man reached into his jacket, pulling out a small leather case. Inside was a badge, federal, unmistakable. "We work with a special branch of the Department of Community Affairs. Your name came across our desk this morning." Jimmy blinked. "I'm just a mechanic. I'm not sure what a branch like yours would want with me." The shorter man leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "It's not what you are, it's what you did. Yesterday, you helped Mrs. Coleman." Jimmy's lips tightened. "Fixed her bike, sure. Got fired for it." The taller man gave a slow nod. "That's the public version. What you might not know is that Mrs. Coleman isn't just a sweet old lady who lives by herself. She's the widow of Samuel Coleman, one of the most influential civil rights attorneys in the state. She's kept a low profile for years, but the people who know her, they listen when she speaks." Jimmy sat back, unsure where this was going. "Okay, And that concerns you how? She's been making calls. To the mayor's office, to community leaders, even to people in the state capital. Your name's on her lips. And she isn't telling them you fixed her bike. She's telling them you stood up to a petty injustice without expecting anything in return. Jimmy almost laughed. I didn't exactly stand up to anyone. Earl fired me on the spot. Sometimes, the shorter man said, the act itself is louder than the outcome. Sarah came in quietly, setting down 3 glasses of water. She studied the 2 men, as if trying to figure out if this was trouble or opportunity. The taller man reached into his inner pocket again, this time pulling out a folded piece of paper. There's a town meeting tonight. It's not a regular meeting. Let's just say there will be people there you wouldn't normally find in Millstone. Mrs. Coleman wants you there. Jimmy frowned. To do what? Be yourself, the shorter man said. That seems to be working for you. The men rose in unison, giving a curt nod before heading to the door. The taller one paused before stepping outside. Mr. Carter, I'd suggest you come. Sometimes the path you think is closed leads straight to the place you're meant to be. When the black sedan pulled away from the curb, Sarah turned to Jimmy. Are you going? He stared at the folded paper in his hand. I'm not sure, but I think if I don't, I'll regret it. Across town, Earl was leaning against the counter, in the garage sipping coffee when a local police officer stopped by for his usual oil change. Earl, still smug about firing Jimmy, grinned. You heard I let Carter go? The officer nodded but didn't look impressed. Yeah, I heard. I also heard you might want to keep an eye on who's talking about you. Word is you ticked off the wrong person. Earl's grin faltered. What's that supposed to mean? The officer shrugged. Just saying Millstone's about to have more important visitors than it's used to. And not the kind you can shoo away. Earl watched him leave, an uneasy tightness settling in his stomach. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Jimmy ironed a shirt he hadn't worn in years. Sarah straightened his collar and gave him a half smile. You look like a man heading somewhere important. He chuckled softly. Funny thing is, I don't even know where I'm heading yet. But deep down, he knew this was no ordinary town meeting. And whatever happened there could change everything. Main Street that morning felt different. The bakery's usual warm smell of cinnamon rolls couldn't cover the cold edge in the air. People didn't just walk. They slowed down, eyes darting, voices lowering whenever the boss's name came up. It was as if the whole town was holding its breath, waiting for the next piece of gossip to drop out at the far end. Mr. Clarkson, the barber, stood outside his shop with a coffee cup in one hand and a skeptical look in his eyes. I heard he fired the mechanic over some charity stunt, he said to Mrs. Lowe, the post office clerk. She shook her head. No, it wasn't charity. He was fixing a bike for free for some old lady. Can you imagine? Every retelling made the boss look worse. Nobody mentioned the old lady's tired hands, the way her fingers trembled when she held the bike's handlebars, or the fact that it was her only way to get to the grocery store. Nobody needed to. The act itself, rowing out a worker over something so small was enough to set people's tempers simmering. Inside the diner, the air buzzed with speculation. The waitress poured coffee with one ear tilted toward a group of regulars in the corner booth. It's not the first time, one of them murmured. Remember what happened to Joe? Got fired right after he took the afternoon off to take his wife to the hospital. Another chimed in, and he never did get his last paycheck. The boss had built his power on 2 things, control and silence. But now, both were slipping. Across the street, the mechanic, our protagonist, was quietly tightening a bolt on a rusted fender. His hands moved steady, his eyes fixed on the task. He didn't look up, didn't join in the whispers. The silence wasn't weakness, it was a choice. Sometimes, Letting others speak for you was the loudest thing you could do. By midday, rumors had grown legs. Someone claimed they saw black SUVs driving past the boss's house at dawn. Someone else swore they spotted a suited man talking to the old lady outside the grocery store. Looked like government business, a man said confidently, as if he knew the details. Meanwhile, the boss was holed up in his office, pacing like a caged animal. His phone rang constantly, calls he ignored, messages he deleted. When his secretary finally stepped in with a hesitant knock, he snapped, "What is it now?" She swallowed hard before speaking. "Sir, people are talking. It's getting loud." "Let them talk," he said, but his voice lacked its usual bite. His fingers drummed against the desk, a restless rhythm betraying his unease. By evening, the old lady at the center of it all became more than just a story. People wanted to meet her. Some brought her baked goods, others offered rides. She accepted each gesture with a polite smile, never mentioning the mechanic's name but never denying his kindness either. It was her silence, too, that made the story stronger, letting others fill in the blanks with their own outrage. That night, as the sun set and the street lamps flickered on, the boss's driveway remained empty, but the air around it was heavy. Somewhere behind closed blinds, he was watching the town turn its back on him, one conversation at a time, and in the shadows, the mechanic kept working, each turn of the wrench echoing like a quiet promise that the truth didn't need to be shouted to be heard. The mechanic's small workshop smelled of oil, steel, and yesterday's coffee. It was well past midnight, but he wasn't sleeping. Sleep had become a rare thing lately, not because of worry, but because work was the one thing that kept his mind steady. The rhythmic clink of tools was better than the restless silence of his bed. Then came the knock, not the casual tap of a neighbor, nor the urgent pounding of trouble. This knock was measured, 3 precise raps, each spaced evenly apart. The kind of knock that belonged to people who never had to repeat themselves. He set down his wrench, wiped his hands on a rag, and opened the door. Outside stood 2 men in dark suits, the kind that didn't wrinkle even after a long drive. Their shoes were spotless, their faces unreadable. Between them, a woman in a tailored navy coat held a small leather folder. "Mr. Harris?" she asked. He nodded. "We'd like to speak with you. May we come in?" He stepped aside, and the 3 entered without hesitation, their eyes scanning the room as if cataloging every detail: the tools on the wall, the grease-stained gloves on the workbench, the single mug by the coffee pot. The woman opened her folder and flipped through a few pages before speaking again. "You repaired a bicycle for Mrs. Evelyn Moore yesterday afternoon. Is that correct?" "Yes." His voice was calm, steady. "You refused payment." "She didn't have to pay," he said simply. The woman's lips pressed into the faintest hint of a smile, not approval exactly, but recognition. "And you were dismissed from your job shortly after?" "That's right." One of the suited men shifted his weight, the leather of his shoes creaking slightly. "Do you know why we're here?" "No." The woman exchanged a brief glance with her colleagues. "Mrs. Moore is not just any elderly woman. She's the widow of Samuel Moore." The mechanic didn't react. The name meant nothing to him. Samuel Moore, she continued, was the founder of Moore Industries. He passed away 5 years ago. What most people don't know is that he left behind certain arrangements. Mrs. Moore has the authority to activate them when she deems necessary. He still didn't speak. It wasn't stubbornness, it was his way of giving them space to say what they really came for. The woman closed her folder. "Yesterday, after you fixed her bicycle, she made a call. That call set things in motion that cannot be undone. People will come asking questions. Others will come offering deals. And some will come with threats." The mechanic leaned against the workbench. "And you're which of the 3? Her eyes held his for a moment. None. We're here to make sure. You understand the scope of what's coming. The man who fired you, he's already feeling pressure. But this is bigger than him, much bigger. The taller suited man stepped forward, speaking for the first time. By morning there will be vehicles outside his house, black SUVs, and they won't be there to deliver flowers. A quiet laugh escaped the mechanic, not out of humor, but disbelief. You're telling me fixing a bicycle started all this? Sometimes, the woman said, the smallest act pulls the loosest thread, and the whole fabric comes apart. 4. A moment, the room was silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. The mechanic studied their faces, searching for cracks in their composure. There were none. Why tell me any of this? He finally asked, because when things start moving, they move fast. And if you don't know why, you can get swept away. The shorter man handed him a plain white card. No logo, no name, just a phone number. Call this if anything happens, day or night. They didn't shake hands when they left. They didn't say goodbye. They simply stepped into the cold night, their dark sedan disappearing down the quiet street without a sound. Mechanic stood in the doorway for a long time after they were gone, the card still in his hand. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A street lamp flickered. He turned the card over. Blank dot inside, he poured himself a fresh cup of coffee, sat at the workbench, and stared at the half-repaired engine in front of him. Whatever was coming, it was already on its way, and for reasons he didn't fully understand, he wasn't afraid that the next morning the mechanic's street was strangely quiet. Normally by this hour, the hum of early commuters and the rattle of delivery trucks filled the air. But today the world paused. He stepped outside to collect the newspaper, but it wasn't there. Instead, there was a thin white envelope on the stoop. His name was handwritten in neat looping script. Inside was a single photograph, black and white, grainy. It showed him bent over Mrs. Moore's bicycle, tightening a bolt, a faint smile on his face. On the back, a single word, thank you. He tucked it into his jacket pocket and walked toward the cafe down the block. But before he could get there, he noticed something unusual. People were looking at him differently. The woman who ran the flower shop gave him a nod that lingered just a moment too long. The old man at the bus stop tipped his hat. Even the teenager who usually sped past on a skateboard slowed down, eyes flicking toward him before quickly darting away. When he reached the cafe, the TV mounted in the corner was on the local news channel. He froze halfway to the counter, and, in a surprising turn, the anchor was saying, "A simple act of kindness is making waves across the city." Yesterday, a local mechanic, recently dismissed from his job, refused payment from an elderly widow after repairing her bicycle. That widow, Evelyn Moore, is, as it turns out, the widow of the late Samuel Moore, founder of Moore Industries. The screen switched to a brief clip of Mrs. Moore speaking outside her home, wearing a soft blue sweater and a smile that was both warm and sharp. "Decency," she said, "isn't something you can buy. When I meet someone who gives without expecting, I remember their face, and I make sure others remember it too." The footage cut back to the anchor, who mentioned growing public criticism toward the mechanic's former employer for firing him. A scrolling ticker at the bottom read, "Local mechanics firing Sparks. Outrage, boycotts threatened." He didn't realize he was still standing in the middle of the cafe until the barista called out, "You want your usual, Harris?" He blinked, nodded, and took a seat in the corner. As the coffee steamed in front of him, he thought about the suited visitors from last night. They had warned him that things would move quickly. They weren't wrong. Outside, a small crowd had gathered across the street, not chanting or protesting, just watching. A few had their phones out. One man lifted his hand in a wave, as if testing to see if the mechanic would respond. He didn't dot by. Mid-afternoon, the first reporters came. They weren't aggressive, at least not yet. A young woman with a press badge from the City Ledger asked if she could just get a quick quote. He refused politely. Then came the calls. The shop's phone rang every 15 minutes, some offering interviews, some offering jobs, and some offering things he didn't quite understand, like visibility packages and reputation monetization. Strategies. He ignored them all. Around 5 o'clock, a black SUV rolled slowly past his workshop. It didn't stop, didn't roll down its windows, but he saw the glint of a camera lens behind the tinted glass. By evening, the internet had caught on. A friend sent him a link to a video titled, "Mechanic Shows Corporate Greed the Meaning of Kindness." It had over 200,000 views in less than a day. Comment sections buzzed with words like hero, symbol, and example. Others warned him to watch his back because big money doesn't like public sympathy for little guys. That night, as he locked the workshop door, someone slid another envelope under it. This one was heavier. Inside was a folded sheet of paper and a small brass key. The note read, "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., corner of Ashford and Main. Bring no one." He stared at the key, its teeth worn from years of use. No explanation, no signature. Just an address. He knew that corner. It was part of the old district, half the buildings boarded up, the rest hanging on by stubborn pride. The smart thing would have been to throw the key away, lock his door, and forget about it. But he wasn't going to do that. Not now. The public's attention was like a tide. It could lift you up, but it could just as easily drag you under. And if Mrs. Moore had set all this in motion, then the next move might already be waiting for him in that part of town. He placed the key on the workbench, its dull brass catching the light from the hanging bulb. For the first time in years, he felt something in his chest that wasn't just endurance. It was curiosity, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of anticipation. The town's main street lay silent under a low-hanging fog, the kind that seemed to muffle even the sound of passing cars. The glow of the lone street lamp outside Jamal's modest home threw a dim yellow halo on the wet pavement. Inside, he sat at his kitchen table, half-empty mug of tea cooling in front of him. His mind replayed the day's events like a film reel. The boss's sneer, the humiliation in front of customers, the old woman's gratitude. And then those SUVs. He hadn't told anyone yet, not even his sister. Some truths needed space to breathe before being spoken aloud. The wall clock read 11:47 p.m. when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Jamal hesitated, thumb hovering over the green button. Something told him this wasn't a wrong number, he answered. "Mr. Jamal Harris?" The voice was smooth, commanding, with the kind of calm you only hear from people who know exactly who they are. "Yes, this is Mayor Preston. I believe we need to talk." Jamal sat up straighter, pulse quickening. "With all due respect, Mayor, why are you calling me at midnight?" A soft chuckle came through the line. "Because I don't want this conversation on anyone's office record. I understand you've had an incident with someone I've been watching for a long time." Jamal's fingers tightened around the phone. "You mean Rick?" "Yes, Rick Johnson. The mayor's." Tone shifted, carrying weight. "He's been untouchable for years. Connections, favors, friends in the right places. But you, son, you've done something remarkable without even realizing it." Jamal frowned. "I fixed a bike. That's all." "You restored dignity," the mayor said firmly. "And you embarrassed a man who's been exploiting this town for decades. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" The silence stretched. Outside, a car engine idled somewhere in the distance. Jamal's instincts told him someone was listening. "What do you want from me?" he asked finally. "Not what I want from you," the mayor replied. "What I can give you. Tomorrow morning, I want you at City Hall, not through the front door. Use the side entrance on Ash Street. There will be someone waiting. Don't speak to anyone else." Jamal swallowed. "And if I don't come?" The mayor's voice turned low, deliberate. "Then you'll wake up in a week to find your name in the paper for something you didn't do. Rick plays dirty. I'm giving you the chance to hit back before he makes his move." The line went dead. Jamal set the phone down slowly, his mind racing. Was this a trap or the beginning of something bigger? He glanced at the clock. Midnight exactly. Outside, the fog thickened. Somewhere out there, in the shadows, wheels were already turning. And Jamal knew by sunrise there would be no turning back. The city was still asleep when Jamal stepped out into the cold morning air. The sky was a pale pre-dawn gray, the kind that promised rain. His breath came out in soft clouds as he tightened his jacket around himself and started walking toward downtown. Every step felt heavier than the last. He'd barely slept. His mind had been chewing on the mayor's words all night. Don't use the front door. Come in through Ash Street. Someone will be waiting. It felt like the setup to a spy film, except this wasn't a movie. By the time he reached Ash Street, the city's main boulevard was just beginning to wake. Delivery trucks rumbled past, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from a nearby bakery. Jamal spotted the side entrance, a narrow steel door tucked between two towering brick walls. No sign, no welcome mat, just a keypad and a faint smell of oil. A tall man in a black coat stepped out from the shadows. His voice was deep, almost gravelly. "Mr. Harris?" Jamal nodded. "Follow me. Don't talk until we're inside." The man swiped a keycard, and the door opened with a soft click. Jamal stepped into a dimly lit hallway lined with filing cabinets and framed photos of smiling politicians shaking hands. The air was cooler inside, almost sterile. They walked in silence until they reached a locked office door. The man unlocked it and gestured for Jamal to step in. The room was warm, wood-paneled, and surprisingly small. Mayor Preston was sitting behind a desk stacked with folders, each marked with thick red tabs. "You made it," the mayor said without looking up. He was scribbling something in a leather-bound notebook. Jamal stayed standing. "You didn't give me much of a choice." The mayor finally looked up, his eyes sharp but not unfriendly. "Sit, we have work to do." Jamal lowered himself into the chair across from the desk. "What is this, really? Why am I here?" Mayor Preston slid a folder across the desk. "Because you've become leverage." Jamal opened the folder cautiously. Inside were photographs, bank statements, and emails, all tied to Rick Johnson. He flipped through them, his chest tightening. This is criminal," Jamal murmured. "Money laundering, property scams." The mayor leaned back. "Rick's been bleeding this town dry for years. Every repair shop, every used car lot, every contract, all funneled through his network. But the bike you fixed? That wasn't just an old woman's bike. That woman is Eleanor Briggs, widow of Harold Briggs, the former district judge who kept Rick's enemies out of prison." Jamal blinked. "You're telling me she's connected to all this?" "Not directly," the mayor said, "but her name still carries weight. When you fixed her bike for free, she told her nephew, who happens to work for me. And here's the kicker. Rick fired you the same day she planned to publicly thank you in the town square." Jamal shook his head slowly. "So I embarrassed him without even trying." "Exactly," the mayor said. "That's why he's going to come after you. And that's why we're going to strike first." The man in the black coat, who'd been standing silently by the door, stepped forward and placed another folder on the desk. This one had Jamal's name on it. Jamal's stomach turned. "What's in there?" Insurance, the mayor said simply. Evidence that will protect you if Rick tries to smear you. But it comes at a cost. You'll have to. Testify when the time comes. Jamal hesitated. Testify? In court? Yes, and not just against Rick. There are others. People with badges, people in offices. People who've been untouchable for too long. The mayor's voice dropped lower, almost conspiratorial. If you're in, I can guarantee your safety and a future Rick can't touch. But if you're out, you're on your own. Jamal stared at the folder. His whole life had been about keeping his head down, avoiding trouble. And yet, here he was, being invited to throw himself into the center of a political war. He thought of Eleanor's warm smile. He thought of the SUVs blocking his driveway. He thought of Rick's cold laugh as he fired him. Slowly, Jamal closed the folder and looked the mayor in the eye. I'm in. The mayor didn't smile, but there was a flicker of approval in his eyes. Good. Then it begins now. You have until tonight to prepare yourself, because tomorrow morning, Rick's going to wake up to a nightmare. The man in the black coat opened the door, and Jamal stepped back out into the cold. The rain had started, a slow, steady drizzle, but the air felt different now. He wasn't just a fired mechanic anymore. He was part of something bigger. And whether he liked it or not, there was no going back. The pale gray light of morning crept through the slats of Mr. Callahan's blinds. His eyes had been open for hours, fixed on the ceiling. Sleep had become a stranger. In its place was a steady drumbeat of dread that throbbed against the walls of his skull. Somewhere in the quiet, he could almost hear the faint hum of engines, a sound that didn't belong in the early calm of Maplewood Heights. Then he heard it for real, low, heavy, controlled. He peeled back the curtain. His breath snagged in his throat. 7 black SUVs stood in a precise line across his driveway and front lawn, their tinted windows glinting faintly under the rising sun. The engines idled in a perfect, menacing harmony, the kind of sound you feel more in your bones than in your ears. A figure stepped out of the lead vehicle. It was him. The old mechanic, Samuel Green, didn't walk so much as glide toward the house. His shoulders straight, his steps unhurried. His work shirt was gone. In its place was a sharp black suit, the kind of tailoring you don't buy off a rack. Behind him, men and women in matching suits stepped out of the other SUVs, forming a silent perimeter. Callahan's hand tightened on the curtain. His pulse hammered so hard he thought his ribs might crack. The doorbell rang. Not a frantic buzz, just one slow, deliberate press. He took the longest walk of his life to the door. When he opened it, the cold morning air swept in, carrying with it a strange mixture of motor oil, coffee, and something else. Authority. Samuel looked him dead in the eyes. There was no anger there, no smugness, just a calm certainty. Morning? Mr. Callahan, Samuel said, his voice low and steady. We need to talk. Callahan's mouth opened, but words stumbled and fell before they could form. Lovely's people? They're here because of what you did, Samuel replied. He tilted his head toward the convoy. Some are from the Department of Transportation, some from the mayor's office, and a few are friends. From further up, Callahan's gaze darted over the suits. Every single one looked like they belonged in rooms where billion-dollar decisions were made. I fixed an old woman's bike, Samuel continued. You fired me for it. That's not illegal. But the way you run your business, the people you shortchange, the corners you cut, that's another story. One of the suited women stepped forward, flashing a federal badge. Mr. Callahan, you're under investigation for multiple counts of fraud, unsafe business practices, and tax evasion. We have warrants. Callahan staggered back. This is crazy. You can't just... Samuel took a single step closer. I could have let it slide, could have walked away after you tossed me out. But you didn't just disrespect me, you tried to humiliate a customer who needed help. And that customer? She's my mother. The words landed like a hammer blow. It hit Callahan all at once. Why Samuel had been so calm that day. Why he'd never raised his voice. The mechanic wasn't. Powerless. He'd been giving him rope to hang himself. In a distance, neighbors began to peek through their curtains, their phones already recording. Samuel glanced over his shoulder. Take him. 2 agents moved in, cuffing Callahan before he could even protest. His voice cracked as he tried to plead, but the sound was swallowed by the quiet, efficient movements of people who had no interest in his excuses. Samuel turned to leave, but paused at the edge of the driveway. He looked back at Callahan, still in his slippers, his hair sticking up from a sleepless night. You fired me for fixing something that was broken, Samuel said softly. Turns out I'm still doing the same thing, only this time. What's broken is you. He slid into the back of the lead SUV. The engines roared in unison, and the convoy rolled out, leaving behind a driveway scarred by tire marks, and a neighborhood that would talk about this morning for years to come. Callahan stood alone, the cold air biting at his skin. The future he'd built on arrogance and shortcuts was gone, replaced by a silence so deep it was almost a kind of prison. And somewhere far down the street, Samuel Green allowed himself the faintest smile, because justice, when done right, doesn't shout. It simply arrives on time, in force, and impossible to ignore.